Okay, for the first class, we talked about some of the course objectives and why data journalism is important. What we're going to do today is going over how to use data in your stories. And there are a number of different aspects to writing a database story or a story based on data. And here they are. It's data, and this is going to be the backbone of our reporting. There are also faces. These are the folks, the humans, that exemplify what you find in your data. There are experts, and these are the people who understand the data and can make sense of the data, make sense of your findings. Another aspect of writing a database story is a wider view. You want data over a long period of time or over a lot of geography, and I'll talk about more of that later. And finally, the pitch. In the real world, when you're a writer or data reporter, you're going to need to sell your story ideas to your editor, and we'll talk about how to do that. Data. Spreadsheets, databases, and maps. Believe it or not, databases are a little bit different from spreadsheets. Databases talk to each other, spreadsheets don't, and they can come in a number of different formats, including text files, like we saw yesterday, Excel spreadsheets, and then SQL files. We'll go over all of them. Data, you also want to know who collects the data and how they're collected and why they're collected. This is important. For example, if you were writing a story using gun data from the NRA, that would be nice to know that it came from the NRA. You still might want to use it, but at least you know there may be some bias in that data. You also want to know the data's limitations. We talked about a bridge collapse scenario yesterday. Now, if that data was just on state-maintained bridge, that would be nice to know as well, because there are thousands and thousands of bridges maintained by the county or the federal government that would not be in data with just state-maintained bridges. You'd also want to know what the data is supposed to measure. Do you have data on all police calls? Do you have data on all arrests, all convictions, all reported crime? These are all slightly different types of data that you would want to know about. And be skeptical of your data. I regularly get salary data for public employees in Charlotte, and I remember I got data one time that said a utility worker earned $5 million. I didn't trust it. I called up the PIO, the public information officer at the city, and they said, yeah, that was a mistake. He actually makes $50,000. Makes sense, doesn't it? And of course, with your data, you want to verify, verify, verify. The saying goes that data are dirty. Humans enter data, so there's always some sort of mistakes in data, and it's our job as reporters to catch those mistakes. Continuing with data. Do more analysis than you'll ever use, in part because you never know what you're going to find. Sometimes you actually write your queries and question the data and find a better story than what you were going in looking for. That's great. Review your findings. In other words, fact check yourself. If you do use data, there's a very good chance that you're the only person in the newsroom, or you're the only person in your company that knows how to use data. So they can't fact check you. You have to fact check yourself. Be able to reproduce your findings. Say you're looking at some crime data and you found out that armed robberies increased 90% in recent years. And then you get sidetracked for a couple of days working on other stories, helping out other reporters, and you come back to the data and you don't know how you found out that 90% increase. You're writing queries and you can't reproduce it. That's a huge red flag, and I would not use that statistic, because chances are you did something inaccurate at the beginning, and running with that inaccuracy could mean big trouble. You want to share your findings early. If you're looking at data that's a shining light on the police department, share your findings with the police department and do it early in the reporting process. They may acknowledge what the data says, Or they might say, well, you also have to consider X, Y, and Z. That can be helpful. And sometimes you look at the data first before you ever know what you're going to write about. In other words, you might just request and analyze data on a topic that interests you, and that's perfectly fine. Faces. Now the opposite could happen. Sometimes you might know your faces before you have your data, and you want to use data to add support or context to those anecdotes that you have. Faces are human examples of your data, and we'll get into some examples later on. And they make your numbers relatable. I said it a number of times. People want to read about people. They don't want to read about numbers. So if you have data on armed robberies in your city, that's great. But what would be even better is to find some victims of armed robbery, or actually talk to some people who have held up people and interview them and put those guys into your story. The third aspect of writing a database story are experts. Experts work with the data all the time. If you're looking at bridge data, maybe you want to talk to a bridge inspector or someone from the Federal Highway Administration. Experts can find holes in your analysis or give it support. In other words, they can fact check you. They can also point to other examples that you didn't think about. Maybe even the experts will tell you about a data set that you didn't know about, and you have a whole nother source of data at your fingertips because of them. And they can interpret your data. Is what you think a lot really a lot? For example, if you're looking at data about city pay and you found out that your mayor makes $100,000, that sounds like a lot to me, but maybe compared to other city mayors, that's just a little. Experts would know that. The fourth aspect is a wider view. Now, a snapshot doesn't tell the whole story, and that's particularly important with data. Often you'll need more details than that. You want to ask for several years or places of data. How does your data compare over a wide period of time or over a wide geography? And a wider view helps you put your data into context. If I were to tell you that there were 87 homicides in Charlotte last year, maybe that's a lot, maybe that's a little. If I had data going back to 1993, I'd be able to tell where that ranks. And a wider view may even change the angle of your story. Say you're doing a story on how low teachers are paid, and you write all your queries and your findings show that police officers and firefighters actually earn less. Maybe your story changes and maybe you focus on the low pay for officers and firefighters. And finally, the pitch. You want to know the minimum and maximum story that you can produce from your data. In other words, if I got this data and I spent a day on it, I know I'll at least have a story on the salaries of teachers. But maybe if I spend a month on it, I'll have a story showing that North Carolina teachers are paid far less than teachers in other states. You want to know how much time and resources each would take. Would it take a day? Would your analysis take a month? I've worked on stories, believe it or not, that take more than a year. And of course I work on other stories in between, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm crunching data for more than a year on a single topic. And you want to know how to reproduce your results. Editors love to know how you got the information that you have. And know where to go next, who to talk to, what questions to ask. You can think of data as a roadmap to your reporting. Your findings will tell you where to go. Using data in your stories. Let the numbers guide your reporting. Pretend you're describing your analysis to a person at Starbucks. What jumps out? In other words, try to simplify your numbers. Database reporting can be really time-consuming and it can be really analytical. And I hate to say the word, but try to dumb it down so you're your friend at the party would understand it and would be interested in it. It's also fine to lead your story with numbers, especially if they're shocking. If I said that according to our data analysis, the salary for our mayor increased 1,000%, well, start your story with that. That's pretty shocking. And it's all right to round numbers in most circumstances. You wouldn't have to say that the mayor's salary increased 997%. 1,000% is fine. Placing data in your story. Spread them out. Don't stack numbers on top of each other. That can be really boring, and the folks who are reading it are going to click off it really quickly. Bullets for data can be helpful. They're simple, short, and clean. Use your data to back up what experts and others say. If someone said that the bridges in your county were the worst bridges in your state, and if you had numbers to show that, put some of those numbers right before or after the quote. You can also use data as subheads. And in case you don't know what subheads are, they are mini headlines in your story, and what they do is they often separate topics. So it could be one data topic, subhead, the next data topic. And finally, sometimes don't even use the data at all. Words work better. Use a quote or use an anecdote. We can fall in love with the numbers because we found them and we came up with them, but we also don't want to get bogged down by them. Please don't do this. Of Charlotte's 26 most congested intersections in 2019, nearly all, 22, are located in South Charlotte. Woodlawn Road had 6 of the city's most congested intersections, Fairview Road has 5, and South Boulevard has 4. In all, South Charlotte is home to 78 of the city's 114 high congestion areas. Uptown has 3, and Myers Park has 2. That's a huge turnoff. What I'd like to do now is go over a few investigative stories that I've worked on at The Observer that relied heavily on data. The first series we titled Against All Odds. Now, this story looked at how often people were winning at the North Carolina Education Lottery. And to do that, we requested a database of all lottery winners going back to 2006. So, a wider view of this project. The data was from 2006 to 2015, a long period of time. The data included all 100 North Carolina counties, a long swath of geography. In all, there are 189,000 records, and we got all publicly available records and rows. In other words, they didn't leave any information out. Now, some of the fields that we got were the player's name, how much the person won, the county that the person lived in, the name of the store that sold the lottery ticket, and if the player was a store employee or actually a store owner. And what we found, 330 people won the lottery 12 times or more. Some beat crazy odds. One woman in High Point beat odds of 1 in 5,000, 1 in 40,000, 1 in 70,000, and 1 in 120,000. Now, to put that in perspective, try this. I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 5,000. What is it? 488. If you guessed that, that's a miracle. And if you did, try to do the same between 1 in 40,000, 1 in 70,000, and 120,000. That's the kind of odds that she built. And we also found that dozens of store owners and employees won the lottery, and some won big. In fact, the only person at the time to win $1 million twice on a scratch-off ticket was a store owner just outside of Charlotte.
In the last 10 years, the North Carolina Education Lottery has produced more than $1.6 billion in prizes over $600, more than 110,000 individual winners, more than 189,000 winning tickets. Retailers selling the tickets are also playing the game and beating the odds. More than 100 owners claimed 1 of every 4 winning tickets sold at their stores. About 850 of them won prizes of $600 or more. One Rowan County store owner won $1 million twice. Franklin County store owner Amit Kumar Pandya is one of the lucky ones. He has won 36 times since 2009 from scratch-off tickets. $66,000 total. How likely is this? Statistician George Rooney crunched the numbers for us.
He's either playing in volume, or there's something fishy, or he's very, very lucky.
Lottery officials track big winners but declined to say how. They chalked up some of the multiple wins to frequent purchases, or simply luck.
To have a 1% chance of seeing someone as lucky as Mr. Pandya, we'd need the entire population of the United States playing 9 times a day.
Here's how improbable it is to win 36 times.
It's more likely that he would flip a heads 142 times in a row. If you took Bill Gates' $79.2 billion and turned it into pennies, the odds of you winning this game 36 times, playing every single day, are as likely as you and your 3 friends going and picking out that exact same penny. It was more likely that you and 2 friends picked the same grain of sand out of all the grains of sand in the entire world.
Pandya told us he plays a lot, but declined to elaborate. North Carolina lottery officials say they're confident all claims paid out were legitimate wins, including Pandya's. But the numbers don't add up.
So if something's amiss, it's either he's playing a lot more than we know, because that's absolutely possible. Now, if he's not playing in volume, then he is just the luckiest person in the world.
That was a neat little video. It was sort of cartoonish, but it did a good job, I think, of mixing data with faces, with the lottery store owners winning a lot, as well as experts who kind of put it all into perspective. And I think it really hit home when you had George Rooney, the statistician, saying just how lucky, if not impossible, some of these lotteries wins were. Now, we ran our findings by a number of experts, and here's what they said. That the people who are winning a lot are either playing and losing a lot, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on lottery tickets, or they're stealing tickets. Now, how could you steal a lottery ticket? Well, if I worked at a store and you wanted me to check if your ticket was a winner, I'd scan it. If it was a winner, maybe I'd just pocket it and tell you it wasn't. Or maybe I'd say it was a winner and give you $100 when really it was worth $10,000, and I'd keep it and I'd cash it in myself. Or the players could be discounting tickets, experts said. Now here's what discounting means. Say John just won a $1,000 lottery ticket, but John owes back taxes and child support. Now when he goes to cash in that lottery ticket, the state is going to garnish that money. So John's smart. What he does is he sells it to his neighbor Bill for $700, even though the ticket's worth $1,000. Bill cashes it in and gets $1,000, so he profits $300. John collects $700, and the state gets nothing. No back taxes, no child support.
So I am very, very certain that this lady spent on lottery tickets at least $756,000. Or actually anybody who would want to come up to win this prize and happen to be a big, lucky big player, they would have to spend at least $756,000. In reality, they probably would have to spend more like $1 million. We picked this lady based on high number of wins in the 600 above category. We don't know how much she was winning or losing in the below 600 category. So there we'll just assume she's winning or losing like every other player. And if I take this big number and subtract these two numbers from it, this will be the total loss that I can guarantee this person incurred if they didn't cheat and if they just truly bought all the tickets themselves. And this is a staggering $230,000. So let me put it down. Total loss. And it really is more of a, because of the assumptions, this is like the bargain basement price. In fact, I would expect she probably lost more like $500,000, but I can guarantee you $250,000. And this is out-of-pocket money, no winnings, no nothing. This is truly the loss. Plain and simple. That's what went out. So this was the price paid for the 41 wins.
That was Jan Hanek, a super nice guy. We went and spent the day with him after we gave him our data to sort of crunch the numbers with. And obviously he did something that we as reporters just couldn't do. That he took these numbers, crunched them, did really hard math on them, and put together a specific dollar amount on how much this one lady would have to spend to actually win as often as she won. He was, I thought, a great example of an expert. He really helped us out with the story. Another big investigation that relied a lot on data was called Fatally Flawed. And what this looked at is how often medical examiners in North Carolina were actually doing their job. And at the beginning of this class, I talked about sometimes you know your face before you ever request your data, and that's what happened here. We had a lady in Gaston County call the newspaper up, and she told us this story, that her son committed suicide, and she buried her son. And a couple of months later, she gets the autopsy report back from the state medical examiner's office. And she's looking at it, and she says, "Who in the heck did I just bury?" The hair color was wrong, the height was wrong, the weight was wrong, the eye color was wrong. She thought that she had literally buried the wrong person. So what we did is we requested data from the state medical examiner's office to see how often the state is screwing up. What we found is medical examiners don't go to the death scenes in 90% of their cases. This isn't TV. This isn't CSI, where they go to the crime scene with the tweezers and a black light and find the smallest piece of evidence and put it in a plastic bag. They weren't even going to the scene. In fact, in about 10% of their cases, the medical examiners didn't even look at the body. They just took the police words for it. And in at least 4 cases, the observer found that medical examiners failed to detect a murder.
I felt like they just didn't care. The decision was made, the paperwork was done, they were moving on.
Did Clay Santamore mean to kill himself? Asheville police and a local medical examiner thought it was an accident, that Santamore didn't know the gun was loaded. But the office of the chief medical examiner in Raleigh labeled his death a suicide. His widow, Shannon, had to go to court to challenge the ruling. At stake was more than $1 million in life insurance.
And he told me that before I went any further, that Clay's death was a suicide, and he was sticking with his decision. And I told him I told him that it didn't make sense to me that this would be called a suicide over an accident. And I started to describe some of the events leading up to the accident. And it became clear to me that he did not know a lot of the details of the case. When he told me quite frankly that None of that mattered. What mattered was his action. And I came back with, well, I think if I'm understanding the definition of suicide correctly, it's not just the action, it has to do with intent as well. You have to intend to end your life. And he responded that a grown man pointing a weapon at himself should understand what would happen if he pulled the trigger, and that that in itself was intent. And then I also asked to speak to a supervisor or a superior. I'd asked several times, and that led me to Deborah Radish, who I spoke to on the phone. And she was very abrupt and very curt with me, and explained that medical examiners don't just go around changing death certificates on a whim. She said unless I could prove that someone else was holding the weapon when it went off, that Clay's death was a suicide and it would stand as a suicide. I told her I planned to appeal the decision, and she chuckled and said good luck to me, and I won't ever forget that. And then when I tried to explain them that there was more to it than meets the eye, I felt like they just didn't care. The decision was made, the paperwork was done, they were moving on. And the impact that would have on my family concerned me. My girls were just over 1 at the time, and my son was 6 going on 7, and I guess I kept thinking about Matthew the most. He and Clay had such a tight relationship. How I would explain to him just suicide seems like his dad chose to leave him, and that wasn't the case.
On December 20th, 2012, 11 months after Clay Santamore died, a judge ruled his death was an accident. The life insurance company paid Shannon Santamore $1.5 million.
Wow, now that's a great video. I crunched a database of 189,000 records of these medical examiner investigations. Probably spent 6 months, 7 months doing it, and I don't think I could come up with a number as powerful as hearing something like that directly from a victim in this case. She was a great example of why the medical examiners and their decisions are important, and the harm that it can do to a family if they screw up. A great face to have in our story. Now, David Worley, this is a sad case. Worley, he was driving down an eastern North Carolina road when his car sped off the road and flipped and crashed into a tree, and the police show up, and of course they see the car accident, and they figured, okay, this is a horrible accident, and we're going to send his body to the medical examiner's office. So they send his body to the medical examiner's office, and the medical examiner, an older lady with knee problems, she looks at the body, and of course he has trauma to his chest and his head, and she too rules Worley's death an accident. Well, a few days later, when Worley's body was getting dressed at the funeral home, the mortician turns him over and sees 4 large stab wounds in his back. And what happened was he was in a fight with his wife, who stabbed him 4 times, and he hopped in his car, tried to save himself and speed away, probably going to the hospital, when he wrecked his car. Now the medical examiner, because she never turned the body over to look at it, ruled it an accident. And the data showed us that because the initial manner of death was accident, but it was later changed in the data to homicide. That's how we found the case of David Worley.
If they had looked over his body, they'd have found them stab wounds in his back.
Ella Grant's grief turned to anger after her son died. The medical examiner said a car crash killed David, but failed to see the stab wounds in his back.
I love my son, and I want justice for him. His name was David Loki Thomas Worley. He was my firstborn, and despite what anybody else thinks, to me, he was very special. You know, they took the body and searched it for gunshot wounds. And after they did not find any gunshot wounds, they just ruled it as an accident. And that's what troubled me the most. If it had not been for the funeral home, we would have cremated and never knew what happened. And it still haunts me. It was not a good job. As of today, we still have not seen a revived death certificate. If they had looked over his body, they'd have found them stab wounds in his back. But that didn't happen until he went to the funeral home. It may not help him, but it might help somebody else. Medical examiner, they need to be examined a little more. It's time for them to get it right.
That was sad, huh? You know, interviewing Worley's mom was great. It showed the human toll that the mistakes the medical examiners make can have on families. And again, the only reason we were able to find Worley's death was because in the data, the manner of death was changed from accident to homicide. Obviously a huge red flag for reporters, but that led us to Miss Ella Grant and led us to a great interview and a great part of the story. Another sad story is Fred Lookaville. Now, Lookaville is a 91-year-old North Carolina resident who was found dead outside of his home at the bottom of his front porch. And he had a history of heart problems. So the medical examiner actually went to the scene in this case and looked up his heart problem history and ruled his death an accident. Well, he too goes to the funeral home, and as his body is being taken care of, the mortician hears these strange clanking sounds, apparently on like a metal pan underneath him. And again, the medical examiner turns Lookaville's body over, and he finds that shotgun pellets are falling out of his back. And it turns out that Lookaville was killed, shot in the back. And the medical examiner, again, never bothered to look at the body as closely as he should have. And in this case, and again in the data, it was initially ruled a natural cause of death, but changed to a homicide, and that's how the Observer was able to spot this case and bring this story to light.
No, if there was a tear in the shirt, surely they couldn't have looked at it too close. I mean, I don't know what the hole would have looked like, but it would have had to have been a hole.
Gail Hildreth is filled with questions about her father's death after Fred Lookaville was found dead outside his Anson County home in 2007. A medical examiner and a detective saw no signs of foul play. It wasn't until the funeral home embalmed the body that the truth emerged. Lookaville had been shot to death.
I was very upset and angry that just how could they have missed it? And I would think, I don't know what a medical examiner and a detective was supposed to be looking for, but it looks like that they would go over it better than what was done. I'm not sure what the state does, but the county messed up. It just seemed like we're small town folk just doing a job. And that's what it's all about. It's not about people. We have lost a great family member who my daughter will never know. My children, my boys were very young, and they miss them. I miss them. I hadn't learned enough from them yet.
That's another sad example. The data led us to Lookabill, but to see the human toll that the medical examiner had on families, that's what our readers are going to remember. Not necessarily the numbers, but the people behind the numbers. Okay, questions. I know this is a virtual class, but any kind of thoughts, concerns, ideas, anything? It can be a lot of information learning how to not only analyze data, but also to use it correctly in your story. So if you have any questions, reach out to me, send up the bat signal, flag me down, whatever you have to do to let me know. Okay, let's go over your homework, Chapter 1 of Data Literacy. Now, what is raw data? These are files that are not summarized. In other words, they're untouched. Raw data allows users to do their own analysis. We want to find out what's important for our goals. We don't want any government spokespeople or organizations telling us what's important. And raw data allows users to check the data's integrity. I was cleaning up data today where there are multiple records or multiple duplicates for records, and what I had to do is cut them out because that would skew my analysis. And I like this quote from the book, that working effectively with data requires more than a computer. It requires thought and reflection on our own parts. In other words, we not only have to write the query, but we have to find out, are our findings unusual? Are they normal? Did I write the right code? You have to take all that into consideration before you go and publish a story. General data terms. And we're going to be spouting these out left and right, so it's good to get them down. Most of them I'm sure you already know. Microsoft Excel. Pretty self-explanatory. I bet most of you all have worked with Excel, maybe not to the extent that we will, but at least you have some sort of familiarity with it. Database Manager. That can be Microsoft Access or SQLite or a number of different programs that handle databases and allow databases to talk to each other. Structured query language. This is the coding language that we'll use in our data analysis. Import or export. Bringing data into a file or moving it out of a file. Delimited versus fixed width. These are formats for the data. And a delimited file means that there is a common characteristic between each column of data. In other words, if I say it was tab delimited, that means there's a tab between each column of data when you import the file. Fixed width, we'll go over that a lot, and that means that the data is already lined up in a text field and you can eyeball where the columns go. File type, text file, Excel file, database file, and format. Each column or each field in a database will have its own format. For example, if you have a name field with people's names in it, that's going to be a format called text. If you have a field with someone's salary, well, that could be a format called number, integer, currency, etc. Same thing, you could have a general format or a date format. There's a number of different formats that we can have, and we'll go over them. Microsoft Excel. Okay, again, I'm sure you worked plenty with Excel, but a little bit more. There are different tabs or worksheets at the bottom. You can create up to 250 different worksheets in one Excel file. You have your rows. Again, there can be up to 1 million rows in one Excel file. Columns or fields, they both mean the same thing. You can have up to 16,000 columns in an Excel spreadsheet. Cell, A1, B4, P14. They're the cells. Records are another name for rows. So I may ask you, how many records does this Excel document have? In other words, how many rows does it have? Header, or column name, and ribbon. That's the bar up top that allows you to insert data or view it or look at the different types of format. And that's the ribbon up top, the blue ribbon. Again, Excel, the formula bar. You can write your formulas here, or you can write them in the individual cell that you want to put the data in, and it'll also pop up in the formula bar. Formula is also another word for function in Excel. We'll learn how to sort data, meaning sort from A to B, or I'm sorry, sort from A to Z, or high to low. And we'll also learn how to filter data, and that's cutting out data on a common characteristic. We'll learn how to freeze panes, so freeze the top row so you can keep scrolling but still see the header. And I'll talk about autofill, and that's a simple step that allows you to repeat your formula a million times with just one click of the mouse. Well, that's it for lesson 2. Remember to keep checking online for any information on assignments, discussion groups, new posts, and email, text, or give me a call if you have any questions. Talk to you later, folks.